Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Raising Healthy Mothers. So, I want to know, are you a packed lunch maker? We are in this family, and not necessarily out of choice. I mean, it would be so much easier in the mornings if we didn't have to pack a lunchbox for our son every day, and a lot cheaper as well, because in the UK, lunches are free for children in the early years. But within a couple of weeks of starting school in reception, he started really struggling, and it became clear that school dinners were just giving him huge anxiety and was underlying his fear of going to school. And so once I figured it out and we started making a packed lunch, then it just improved massively. So for us, sending him in with a packed lunch was an obvious no-brainer. And to be fair, we had been making packed lunches for him since before school started because his childminder didn't provide food. So we always had been packing lunches anyway for him. So it makes sense, I guess, that it would feel alien to him to start eating school food, not least because he was, and still is to a certain extent, very particular with his food. Now, I was conflicted by it, to be fair, because on the one hand, I had been told that, once children start school and they start eating the school dinners, that they start eating a lot more food that they would never try at home. That peer pressure of what their friends are eating and how much they're eating, or just being in a different environment. I heard so often how much more adventurous their children were at school or at childcare. But then on the other hand, I know that the food that we put in his lunchbox, even within his fussy limits, are much more nutritious and less highly processed than school meals. So I did have this conflict of, on the one hand, it would be a lot easier and cheaper if we didn't have to make it for him. On the other hand, packed lunches from home are probably more healthy. So in this episode, I thought I would talk about how to craft packed lunches that your child will actually eat, as well as offer ideas on how to increase nutrient density bit by bit, step by step, if you have a fussy eater like I do. So we're going to cover why balanced lunches matter, how to make packed lunches a success rather than a battle, and some small swaps and simple ways to improve variety and nutrition in packed lunches, as well as the underlying idea that it's probably okay, whatever you're doing right now. So I am guessing that if you are spending the time making packed lunches at the moment, it's because maybe like mine, your child can't face school dinners, maybe there's allergies, or maybe, there's a religious reason for it. Or maybe like me, you suspect that what you can make for them at home is potentially better than what they would get in the school dinner hall. So let's start with why a balanced lunch matters. Look, kids can be fickle. Sometimes they have bottomless appetites. Sometimes they barely want to eat anything. And I do feel quite strongly that children should be allowed and encouraged even to listen to their own body and energy needs. But on the other hand, they also need to know that if they are following a set routine, like at school, that lunchtime has to happen at a certain time. They can't just help themselves to the snack cupboard. So offering a lunch that is both balanced and interesting to them is important to make sure that they want to eat it and are getting enough nutrients that are going to fuel their day of learning or playing or whatever it is that they're doing for that day ahead. So what is it that makes up a balanced lunch? So for focus and energy, kids, just like adults, need protein for sustained energy. It keeps them fuller for longer and helps them with growth and repair. And of course, they are growing every single day and they are moving so much more than we are as adults. And so they need that protein. And I'd say it's arguably more important that they get enough protein in than eating lots and lots of different vegetables because their bodies are literally growing and they need the protein to do that. Then they also need healthy fats for their brains, for the health of their brain. Our brains are literally made up of fat, and when they are little, like they are, their brains are still growing and developing. So we really need to support that with healthy fats. And then carbohydrates, which are used for quick bursts of energy. Complex carbs from whole grains and starchy vegetables will release that energy much more steadily compared to if we go for those simple carbohydrate options, because we want them to have the energy to move and play without those highs and lows and crashes of quick energy that you can get from refined carbs. And then, of course, the veggies and the fruits for fiber and essential vitamins. And then these are also quite helpful because they can help with hydration, which is also important for the brain and body to function properly. And of course, with a bit of fruit, you can add some natural sweetness to their lunch. Now, look, you might be sitting here listening to what I've just said, and you might be worrying, well, my child is only eating chocolate spread sandwiches on white bread. Look, hang in there because it's not necessarily just about optimizing and making everything perfect. It's about having options and giving them a variety. Which brings me nicely on to the second key point about lunch. No matter how good or bad you consider your child eats, start with wherever they are at. Think about what you know they will already eat and make sure that they have enough of that familiar food. For me, a packed lunch is just not the right time to be challenging them to try new food. The way I think about it is, for the most part, I keep breakfast and lunch relatively predictable. It's partly due to convenience. Obviously, timing and circumstances means I don't have the luxury to try new foods in their lunch boxes. But instead, what I do is I use dinner as the meal where I gently challenge them to open up their horizons with new foods, while obviously still keeping some aspects familiar and safe for them. And I think this works because dinner is where they're more likely to be relaxed because they're at home, there's more time to try new flavors, and there's more scope for giving them space to say no, and they're just not as distracted as well. And plus, if I'm honest, my children seem to have less of an appetite at dinner time, so the pressure to feed them food to keep them going is a lot less. Now, I'm not to say this is not necessarily true of all children, so that's just my experience, but it has helped me to know that if they don't eat lots of food at dinner time, it's probably okay because they don't actually tend to wake up hungry. Look, this isn't an episode about navigating fussy eating generally, so I'm not going to go into detail here about safe foods and how to present it. But I have recorded several episodes in the past about this, and I will share them in the show notes if you want to follow them up. I also have a workshop on feeding a fussy eater, which goes into a lot more detail and practical how to on feeding a fussy eater without losing your mind. In contrast to dinners, lunches at school can be quite an onslaught on the senses. You're surrounded by so many more people than you normally would be. It's noisy, there's unfamiliar smells, there's a routine and a system that is much more rigid potentially than at home. And there's limited time as well. And they are anxious to get out and play. And I think these are all the reasons why my son struggled so much in those early weeks when he was having school lunches. So keeping packed lunch relatively predictable and simple probably helps to keep the pressure off in that kind of sensory overwhelm aspect. So focusing in on familiar food can really help here. So if they love plain pasta or they have a specific type of sandwich, make that the foundation of their lunchbox. You can build around it. So for my son, for most of reception, all he would eat was a ham wrap. Now in year one, it's a melted cheese wrap. It's fine because I know I can control the quality of the wrap, the quality of the ham, and what cheese goes in. And I think that's a decent amount of protein there. This is, and I think it's okay to repeat the same thing every day if that's what works. If they come back with a relatively empty lunchbox, I think that's good. Variety doesn't always mean brand new recipes or really exciting lunchboxes. It can just mean presenting familiar food in a different way. Okay, so we've got the foundation of your lunchbox sorted, whether that's plain pasta, a ham sandwich, or a cheese wrap. So, what are you going to serve around them? Again, here, I think you can start with where they are at, but also think creatively. Maybe start with making a list of all the sides and the bits that you know they like, whether that's crisps, chocolate biscuit, piece of cake, carrots, whatever it is that you know that they will eat. And then think about what else there is out there that might satisfy that same texture or flavor that they like. So, for example, my son really loves crunchy food, but I actually never put crisps in his lunchbox. So instead, quite often we put things like crunchy apple crisps, we put roasted chickpeas in, or crispy seaweed, and he loves all of those things. They satisfy that crunch, and I prefer that he doesn't have crisps in there. If your children like dips, then try a different variety rather than using the same one every single day. Just try different ones. Even if it's a variety of the same thing, like caramelized hummus instead of plain hummus, roasted red pepper hummus. Obviously, you know your child best and you know whether they're going to go red hummus. What? But also think about varying what you serve with the dip too, whether that's using different types of vegetables for the veg sticks or different types of breadsticks even. Maybe try plain ones one day, maybe try ones with sesame seeds and even try ones that are a little bit knobbly another day or cheese straws. Like just varying that is going to get them used to the idea that some food can taste the same but look a little bit different. And that's, I think, what is going to help here with getting them to accept a variety of food. Remember, we're playing the long game here, and we're getting them used to seeing different versions of familiar food is all part of stretching them. And if you regularly put things like chocolate or a chocolate biscuit in their lunchbox, depending on what the rules are at your school, then think about how you can vary that too. And consider whether you need to include it every day as well. I'm not saying that you need to put it on a pedestal at all, but just in the interest of varieties. So sometimes my son will have chocolate covered chickpeas in his lunchbox. Sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes I might add a biscuit. Sometimes I don't. Like if I have time, I might make biscuits or muffins and they go in occasionally, but it's not a given. Like it's not every single day just because I just don't always have the time. And then you can also vary the bread variety. So you're experimenting with wraps or bagels or pita breads or even rice cakes or just different ways of presenting the same food. You could give them the bread and the filling separately and they can make up their own sandwiches. Again, handling that food is quite good for them as well. If you feel like they're really stuck on white bread, can you think about slowly transitioning them to wholemeal or seeded options by doing two slices of bread that are different and mixing it up for the sandwiches? Look, if reducing reliable ultra processed food feels really overwhelming for you, don't try and change everything at once. Just start small, start with one or two things and just introduce a slight difference at a time. One of the best ways I think that you can help make lunches a little bit more interesting and successful in terms of getting more variety in is to try and involve them in the process. Talk about it. Talk about what they like in their lunchbox. Let them choose. Offer a couple of options for fruit or veg or snacks or whatever it is. Giving them a say, giving them the option makes them much more likely to eat it. Okay, if my son really did have the option, he probably would ask for, I don't know, ice cream and chocolate and biscuits in his lunchbox. But I do talk about why certain foods belong and some don't. So I will talk about the fact that, well, try and have cheese in your wrap because that is protein and that's going to help your muscles grow strong so you can run around, you can play football and do all those fun things that you love doing with your friends. And then getting them involved in packing their lunch. Now, full disclaimer, my son doesn't like doing this, but my daughter does. She does quite like sitting on the counter and like maybe spreading the hummus on the wraps or spooning things in or whatever it is that she can get involved in. She does like getting involved. Or as they get older, get them to pack their own lunch boxes because if it is a bit of a chore for you, get them to take responsibility. Obviously, this is a slow process and it starts with maybe just getting them to help out a little bit at a time, but over time, transition towards them doing their own lunchboxes. Getting them involved is going to help them feel like they have a bit of control. They have a bit more predictability because they know what's gone in their lunchbox and they know what they're going to be faced with when they open it up. And it probably will make them a little bit more curious about their food. I really strongly believe in the power of talking about food and why we eat certain foods and why we make certain choices and why some foods just never make it into the house and some foods are always in the house. I think our children are so much smarter than we give them credit for. And talking to them about it really helps them to um, understand why we might sometimes say no or only a small amount or whatever it is. So if your child is particularly picky and you know that none of what I've suggested is going to help, just know that you're probably doing fine. If you have looked at picky eating in the past, and looked at ways to get them to eat more, then just focus on doing that at dinner time or whichever meal feels the most relaxed and kind of in control for you. A few tips that might help if you're really worried about the fact that they just don't eat much of their lunchbox, think about dip. So if they love ketchup, it's okay to serve them ketchup with their lunchbox, even if they're dipping their crackers and their breadsticks and their whatever in. Like it's totally fine. Obviously, if they like different dips, just do that variety of hummus or tzatziki or whatever it is that they will accept. Go for small portions. If they regularly come back with their lunchbox absolutely rammed full, maybe it's just a bit overwhelming for them. So could you get a lunchbox that has, smaller compartments or fewer compartments and just serve a small amount of food in each one? There's no point sending them in with a full, box of food only for it to come back and go straight in the bin. That's a waste of money. But also talk to them. Just say, "Look, I noticed your lunchbox is still full. Did you not feel like you wanting to eat today?" And they might tell you. They might tell you what happened. And you can talk to them about what they would like to see in their lunchbox instead. And then remember that repetition is key. Even if they come back with their carrot sticks always like uneaten, don't worry. They might well pick it up another day. You could try offering it in different ways. So instead of carrot sticks, maybe you could grate it tomorrow. Maybe you could cut it into discs. Maybe you could cut it into little stars. Maybe you could try cooking them. Um, but don't give up. If you know it's something that they usually like at home, then it's okay to send it in at school, even if they keep coming back with it. Look, remember, feeding kids is a marathon. It's not a sprint. You're not going to get it perfect straight away. Lunch doesn't have to be perfect. And it's totally okay if some days are just about getting the basics in. The fact that you're trying, the fact that you're thinking about it, the fact that you're worrying about it, honestly speaks volume. You really care and it matters to you. But start small, start with manageable changes and involve them wherever you can. Over time, you will build healthier habits without the pressure. And I know this because I can see the difference between, what my son would eat or wouldn't eat a year ago to what he will be willing to try now. So remember, it will come in time. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you found this episode helpful and you know someone else who would find it useful, then please pass it on to them. And as always, if you can, please leave me a review. It makes such a difference because it means so many more people will see the podcast. Otherwise, I will see you next week for the next episode of Raising Healthy Mothers.